Welcome back on this Monday to These Things Are Written. Last week we wrapped up Acts chapter 8. And at the end, remember of how it was talking about Philip's ministry, going out to Samaria to preach the good news and ending up on the road to Gaza, where he was able to speak with the Ethiopian eunuch and have him learn who Jesus is and be baptized. Wonderful stories there. And now as we begin chapter 9, it kind of connects back to Acts chapter 8 at the very beginning. We begin Acts 9, verse 1. But Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogue at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now he went on his way. He approached Damascus. And suddenly a light from heaven shone around him. And falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do. The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were opened, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And for 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. This is the word of the Lord. Now, as we begin this chapter, we really take over from Acts chapter 8, verse 3. We see very much the same thing. Saul breathing out murderous threats, arresting men and women and imprisoning them. It kind of picks up from there. He speaks with the chief priest, wanting to get permission to go to Damascus to do the same thing for those who were scattered as was happening in Jerusalem. Now, Damascus, modern-day Syria, actually the capital of modern-day Syria, same place, same location, so it was a ways away, but all fairly close to that part of the world, fairly close to Jerusalem. Close enough that he would need to ride a horse, but more than it would take to go in a day or two. So they went to Damascus with a letter in hand, being able to persecute the early church known as the Way. The Way is an early name for Christianity that we see being mentioned here in Acts 9. It was one of the early names for Christianity, most likely taken from the Gospel of John, or from the story that John shared in John 14 of Jesus speaking the word, saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Speaking of the way, that Jesus was the way to heaven and to eternal life. Now, the purpose that he had in going to Damascus was simple. Arrest men and women that were believers in Jesus, speaking of his name, bring them to Jerusalem to stand trial before the Sanhedrin, where they would be in prison or beaten or maybe even worse. He was sent to go to Damascus. But something happened. Something strange happened on the way to Damascus. Saul, the persecutor of the church, saw the light. Literally, a light shining down on him. And he saw the light spiritually in Jesus, who started to speak to him. Remember again, while this isn't John's gospel, often in John's gospel and other places, Jesus speaks about the dichotomy of light and darkness, of how light is the sign of hope and forgiveness and Christ. He was the light who came into the world. And darkness is a sign of unbelief. So as we look at this, the light symbolizes that Saul is coming into the faith, that Jesus is speaking to him. We say a voice called out to him saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Saul doesn't know who's speaking. Maybe he thought that there was someone who he was after that was trying to get to him. We don't know. We know who it was, but Saul didn't. Saul replied, simply saying, "Who are you, Lord?" The word for Lord can be taken as master, not necessarily God, but one who is in authority over others. Saul recognized that this person who was speaking to him from the bright light was in authority over him. And Jesus said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." Kind of went right to the point, didn't he? I am Jesus, the one you're persecuting me. Tying it back to what he said first, he then gave Saul directions: rise and enter and wait. He rose, but he couldn't see. For 3 days, he was without sight, without food, without anything to drink. He had plenty of time to think. Think about what happened to him and how he had persecuted this one who had now spoken to him and called him. The 3 days, I think, is significant for another reason. You see, Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days, wasn't he? He was in the tomb where there was darkness, no food, no water, and he came to life, bringing new life to all who believes in him. Saul, who would be later to be known as Paul, writes about how he was abnormally born by a light being called straight from Jesus. Great passage as we see how Saul, who is dead, seems to be sitting in that tomb of despair for 3 days. And tomorrow we'll find what happens and how he comes to life. We'll see you then. God bless.